Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. There's something about stories that begin with a deal struck in the dead of night, where desperation meets something far older, far colder than human reason. This is one of those stories. Not a tale of virtue born from light, but a legend scorched into darkness. Fire. Chains. Screaming tires on asphalt as old as sin. It begins in a forgotten town, under a sky heavy with dust and fate, with a young man who only wanted to save his father. And from that moment, when pen met paper in a contract he didn't fully understand, his life ceased being his own. What unfolds next isn't a hero's journey in the traditional sense. It's a curse disguised as power. A transformation that doesn't elevate, but consumes. And at its center is a man who burns, literally and metaphorically. A man torn between the person he used to be and the thing he's become. A man who rides not toward glory, but away from damnation. Chased by demons. Haunted by regret. Bound by a promise written in blood and fire. It starts with Johnny Blaze, a stunt motorcyclist with nerves of steel and a heart that still carries the ache of the past. As a teenager, he watched his father waste away, stricken with illness and worn thin by time. And when the chance came to cheat death, he took it. That chance wore a black coat and a devilish grin. It offered healing in exchange for something that couldn't be measured. A soul. A life. A future. What the young Johnny didn't know was that tricks like that always come with strings. And the man who gave him that deal, Mephistopheles, wasn't in the business of mercy. His father was saved, only to die in a fiery crash the very next day. A cruel loophole in an already cruel game. And from that moment on, Johnny was marked. Doomed to ride alone. To chase death and never outrun it. Years pass. Johnny becomes a legend of a different kind, the daredevil who doesn't fall. Who crashes through flaming hoops and jumps helicopters like he's tempting fate. And in a way he is. He's still trying to outride what's chasing him. Fame. Danger. Solitude. But beneath the leather jacket and showman smile is a man still bound to the deal he made. And fate, as always, comes calling. It doesn't just knock, it roars in. A night comes when the world shifts. The sky blackens. The stars turn away. And Johnny wakes to a burning in his bones, a scream in his skull, and a fire that won't die. His flesh characters. His eyes blaze. His soul erupts into flame. And in his place stands something ancient and terrifying, the rider. A skeletal figure wreathed in fire, cloaked in chains, riding a motorcycle that shatters the pavement with every turn of the wheel. He doesn't speak. He doesn't pause. He judges. The transformation is horrifying. But it's also breathtaking. A living inferno driven by vengeance and fury. By night, the rider hunts the wicked. Not for justice, but as payment. As a bounty hunter for hell itself. And Johnny? He watches helplessly from inside, a passenger in his own burning body. But there's more at play. Hell, it seems, is having a bit of a family dispute. Mephistopheles' son, Blackheart, has emerged from the shadows, eager to claim power for himself. Cold, pale, and radiating malice, Blackheart seeks an ancient contract, a soul-packed ledger known as the Contract of San Venganza. With it, he can command 1,000 damned souls and reshape the earth into his own hellish domain. He's not here to whisper. He's here to conquer. Johnny, newly awakened to the curse inside him, finds himself pulled into this war. Not by choice, but because he's the only one who can stop what's coming. The rider may serve hell, but Blackheart threatens to unmake even that order. And so begins a chase through city streets and scorched plains, through graveyards and forgotten churches. Fire against frost. Damnation versus domination. In the midst of this chaos stands Roxanne, Johnny's old flame, now a rising news reporter who spent years trying to forget the boy who vanished from her life. Their reunion is raw, painful, beautiful. She sees the man he's become and senses the sorrow behind his eyes. But love alone won't save them. Not this time. Not when the devil himself is watching from the rafters. As the battle escalates, Johnny begins to wrest control from the rider. He learns that the curse doesn't have to own him, that perhaps, with enough will, he can aim it. Not to serve hell, but to protect those left in its path. His bike becomes more than just a machine. It becomes a weapon, a symbol. His chains, once shackles, become tools of retribution. And through fire, he begins to carve a new path. One of the most gripping moments comes when Johnny confronts a rogue caretaker, a grizzled old soul who harbors secrets of his own. It's here that the past is revealed. The rider is not a new curse, but an old mantle. Passed down. Chosen. Or rather, claimed. The caretaker, once the last rider, bears his own scars. And in one unforgettable ride through the desert, two riders blaze side by side. One flesh, one bone, both on fire, roaring toward a final reckoning. The climax unfolds in the ghost town of San Venganza, where the contract waits. Blackheart seizes it, consumes the souls, transforms. But Johnny, at the edge of breaking, summons the rider one last time. And what follows is not a brawl, but a judgment. The penance stare, a stare that reflects every sin, every scream, every ounce of suffering back into the soul of its bearer, is unleashed. And Blackheart, swollen with evil, is forced to feel every ounce of it. It is not the fire that ends him, it's the guilt. When the dust settles, Mephistopheles returns. Offer in hand. Freedom in reach. But Johnny, burned and reborn, refuses. He'll keep the curse. Keep the flame. Not as a servant, but as a guardian. I'm gonna own this thing, he says. I'm gonna use it against you. And in that moment, the man who once made a deal with the devil becomes something far more dangerous, a rebel with hell's own fire in his fists. The road stretches out. The engine rumbles. And the rider rides again. What makes this story so compelling isn't just the spectacle, it's the myth beneath it. The idea that power doesn't come clean. That redemption has teeth. That love, while fragile, is sometimes the only thing that can pull a man back from the edge. Every twist, every scream, every chain whip lashing against the night sky is built on that foundation. A man cursed not because he was weak, but because he cared. The visuals burn themselves into memory. The transformation sequences, bones catching fire, skin peeling back to reveal a skull wreathed in flame, are grotesque and beautiful. The motorcycle, once a symbol of rebellion, becomes a chariot of wrath. Flames trail behind it like echoes of damnation. Every time the rider appears, the screen doesn't just light up, it erupts. And the themes, hidden beneath the smoke and sparks, hit hard. Sacrifice. Identity. Choice. The eternal tug-of-war between destiny and defiance. At its heart, the story asks, can a man who made the worst deal still become something good? Can he steer the fire? Or will it always burn him first? This isn't a tale of salvation wrapped in light. It's one forged in darkness. And that's what makes it unforgettable. So if you've ever felt haunted by a choice you made, if you've ever wondered what it would mean to carry your burden instead of escaping it, if you've ever believed that fire, when wielded right, can purify as well as destroy, then this one's for you. Stick around, because in our upcoming deep dives, we'll be breaking down the characters, the themes, the stunts, and the strange production stories that turned this flaming tale into a cult classic. Don't miss what's coming next. And if you haven't already, make sure to like this video and hit subscribe. Join us as we keep digging into the movies that burned brightest in our memories. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road. And maybe don't make any midnight deals. Before the fire. Before the chain. Before the name became a whisper of dread in the underworld, there was a boy, a father, and a choice made beneath the ache of desperation. The story doesn't start with vengeance. It starts with love. It starts in grease-streaked garages and the dry heat of a sun-baked carnival town. It starts with a rumble of a motorcycle engine and a teenager with calloused hands and a heart too soft for what's to come. Johnny Blaze. The name was made for flames. A circus kid born into risk, his life revolved around ramps and rubber and crowds that held their breath every time his father, Barton Blaze, soared through the air. Together, they were legends of their little world, carving arcs through the sky on twin bikes, father and son performing stunts that dared death to try harder. But behind the roar of applause and the glare of pyrotechnics, a darker shadow loomed. Barton was sick. Not just coughs or fatigue, but the kind of sick that doctors speak about in half-sentences, eyes lowered. A sickness that drains color from the world before it takes the man entirely. Johnny found out the way sons often do, by accident. A crumpled diagnosis sheet. A bloody handkerchief. A sense that something was being hidden. And when he confronted his father, the truth didn't come with comfort, it came with silence. A resignation. Barton didn't want his son to worry. But it was too late for that. And then came the stranger. One night, alone in the fading light of the carnival's closed grounds, Johnny found himself face to face with a man who looked like he belonged in another century. A black coat, a fedora casting shadows across eyes that never quite blinked, and a smile that promised something, though it was never clear what. He introduced himself as Mephistopheles. He didn't say the word devil, but he didn't need to. He offered a deal. Barton Blaze would live. The illness would vanish. The stunt career would continue. All Johnny had to do was sign a contract. In blood. Just a drop. Just a signature. The paper shimmered with an eerie luster, almost as if it were breathing. Johnny hesitated, heart pounding. But the fear of losing his father outweighed every whisper of instinct screaming at him to run. He signed. And the devil, true to his word, kept it, sort of. The next morning, Barton was full of energy. Healthy. Rejuvenated. Laughing like he hadn't in years. Johnny watched with wonder and relief. But by evening, everything changed. During a routine jump, Barton miscalculated, a rare and deadly mistake. He crashed, engulfed in flames before Johnny could even scream. The illness was gone. But death still came. That's how Mephistopheles worked. His deals were clean, his tricks even cleaner. In grief, Johnny tried to confront him. But the devil merely smirked. "I kept my end," he said, fading into smoke. "Now you'll keep yours." And so Johnny ran. He left the carnival. Left everything. The boy with the flame in his name disappeared into the highways, carrying with him the weight of a soul mortgaged to something unspeakable. Years passed. Johnny re-emerged as a different kind of legend. A stunt rider who defied physics, logic, and death. He didn't just take risks, he invited them. He jumped helicopters, skyscrapers, walls of fire. He played it cool in the public eye, smirking through interviews and waving to adoring crowds. But underneath the bravado was a man still running. Still afraid. Still wondering when the devil would collect. Every stunt, every close call, it wasn't just performance. It was a question. Is this the day I die? And when it wasn't, he'd ride again. Pushing harder. Flying higher. Daring fate to blink. And then one day she returned. Roxanne. The girl he left behind all those years ago. She wasn't a carnival teen anymore. She was a reporter now. Sharp, skeptical, beautiful in the way that aches. When she appears at one of Johnny's stunts, the past crashes into the present like two wheels meeting at high speed. She wants answers. Why did he leave without a word? Why disappear when they were meant to ride off together? Johnny doesn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Because how do you explain that you're marked by the devil? That you hear whispers in the dark and feel fire crawling under your skin when the moon rises? He deflects. Jokes. But Roxanne sees through it. She always did. Elsewhere, in places where light doesn't reach, something ancient stirs. Blackheart. The name sounds like a fairy tale villain. But he is very real. The son of Mephistopheles, banished from hell for ambition too great even for damnation. Now he walks the earth with a new plan, one that involves an old relic lost to time, the Contract of San Venganza. A document said to contain the souls of an entire corrupted town, bound together in an unholy ledger. Whoever possesses it controls unimaginable power. Blackheart doesn't come alone. He brings with him a trio of elemental demons, agents of earth, wind, and water. Each one inhuman. Each one cruel. Together, they begin their search, leaving behind a trail of twisted corpses and whispers of unnatural storms. Hell, it seems, is rising again, but this time not under Mephistopheles' rule. And so, the devil returns to Johnny. He doesn't ask. He claims. The contract signed all those years ago was not forgotten. Johnny's body begins to change. At dusk, his skin cracks. His blood ignites. He screams not in pain, but in transformation. Flesh gives way to bone. A skull, flaming and fierce, replaces his face. The rider is born. The first ride is chaos. Johnny wakes on his motorcycle, but it's different now. Larger, hotter, chained to something eternal. He's pulled toward wickedness. Toward a soul dark enough to merit his judgment. And when he finds it, the rider unleashes his fury. The chain swings, molten and screaming through the air. The penance stare is revealed, an ancient, terrible gift that forces the guilty to relive every pain they've caused. Their eyes burn. Their soul withers. Their body collapses. The next morning, Johnny stumbles home. Exhausted. Scorched. Confused. He doesn't remember it all. Only flashes. Fire. Screams. A man begging for mercy. And suddenly, he understands. He's not just cursed. He's used. A weapon forged in hellfire, now aimed at demons his master cannot control. But the difference now is, Johnny wants to aim it his way. This decision, of course, comes with consequences. The police begin to notice the path of destruction. Bodies burnt, property ruined, no explanation that makes any sense. They arrest Johnny, suspecting him of involvement in the murders. In a holding cell, surrounded by criminals, something awakens again. One man mocks him, pushes him, and then the flames erupt. Chains fly. When the smoke clears, the rider walks free. The guilty lie broken. The innocent, untouched. Outside, Roxanne watches the chaos. She's seen the news, the stories, and now she suspects the unthinkable. The man she loved, the man who vanished, is something else entirely. When she confronts Johnny, he finally confesses. He tells her about the deal, about the fire, about the price paid long ago. She listens, stunned. Her belief wavers. But somewhere deep inside, part of her already knew. As Blackheart grows stronger, gathering souls and closing in on the contract's location, Johnny seeks help. He's not the first rider, and he knows it. Deep in the desert, he finds a caretaker, an old man who tends to a forgotten graveyard and speaks in riddles. But behind his quiet eyes is a past as fiery as Johnny's. He, too, once bore the flame. And now, seeing the darkness rising again, he chooses to ride one last time. Together, they ride into the night. Two spirits ablaze. Two engines screaming. Fire stretching across the sands like a comet. A ride not for show, but for reckoning. The rider is no longer running. He's hunting. And the real war is just beginning. In the hush that follows a desert ride lit by hellfire, there's a moment where everything stands still. Two riders, one young and burning with questions, the other old and hollowed by memory, have carved a path through darkness. The air still carries the scent of scorched earth and gasoline. And ahead lies a truth that neither of them can escape. The contract is real. Blackheart is close. And the war that has smoldered at the edges of this story is about to ignite in full. The caretaker leads Johnny to the edge of San Venganza, a ghost town buried in dust and ash, forgotten by maps but not by hell. It's here that the ancient contract was hidden centuries ago, sealed away to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. The town, cursed and hollow, stands like a monument to betrayal. Long ago, the people here made their own deal. They sold their souls, every last one of them, and became bound to a single damned page. A document so soaked in corruption that even Mephistopheles hesitated to claim it. But his son does not share his caution. Blackheart's hunger is absolute. He arrives in the ruins, his elemental followers silent behind him. The contract, once hidden beneath layers of stone and secrecy, is uncovered with ease. His hands close around it. The ink glows. The names whisper. And then he changes. The souls pour into him, screaming as they are consumed. His body twists. His skin grays. His voice deepens. What was once a petulant prince of darkness becomes something else, Legion. A creature not made of one will, but of 1,000. Every soul he devours adds weight to his gaze. Every scream he silences strengthens his power. He no longer walks. He moves like a storm in flesh. Johnny arrives too late to stop the transformation. But not too late to fight. Flames erupt as the rider awakens. The motorcycle roars, wheels crackling against the brittle bones of the forgotten town. Chains slash through the dust, striking demons down like they're made of paper. The elemental guardians fall one by one. Earth crushed under its own weight, water evaporated by searing heat, wind scattered by the force of the flame. Each death is brutal, final. Johnny, now fully merged with the rider, fights not just for vengeance, but for control. To reclaim his soul. To reclaim purpose. But Blackheart, no, Legion, is beyond fire now. The flames no longer hurt him. The penance stare, the rider's ultimate weapon, has no effect. For what guilt can be found in a creature made of thousands? The eyes of the damned have looked into their own sins for so long, they no longer flinch. Johnny tries. He grabs him, glares into his soul, and nothing happens. It should be over. And yet, in this hopeless moment, something stirs in Johnny. He remembers the contract. He realizes the power doesn't lie in destroying Legion, but in controlling the souls inside him. And here, the twist sharpens like a blade. Johnny doesn't hand the contract over. He absorbs it. He takes in the 1,000 damned souls, the weight of their sins flooding into his body. His flames flare brighter, wilder, burning blue with ancient fury. His skeletal form trembles beneath the pressure, but he holds. The rider changes, grows, becomes something far older than vengeance. Now, when he looks at Legion, the penance stare works. Because Johnny, for a moment, holds the guilt of all those souls within him. And when he unleashes it, when he turns it back on the monster that tried to steal them, Legion cannot survive it. The scream that follows is not human. It is layered, echoed, 1,000 cries in one. Legion collapses into dust, the contract disintegrating with him. And for the first time in this journey, the world goes still. No fire, no smoke, just silence. Mephistopheles appears once more, as if drawn by the closing of the deal. He claps slowly, mockingly, offering Johnny what was promised all those years ago: freedom, release from the curse. The rider's flame snuffed out forever. A chance to live again. But Johnny refuses, not because he wants the curse. Because he's learned what it means. He's seen what happens when that power is left in the wrong hands. He's watched the innocent die while the guilty laugh. And so he makes a new kind of deal. Not with the devil, but with himself. He'll keep the curse. He'll ride, not as a servant of hell, but as its rebellion. Mephistopheles, snarling, vanishes into shadow. Defeated. Not by violence, but by defiance. Roxanne finds Johnny in the aftermath. She sees what he's become, what he's chosen to stay. And though her heart aches, she understands. Their paths, once so tightly woven, now diverge. She kisses him, not with goodbye, but with acceptance. He is no longer the boy she loved. He's something else. As the sun rises over the wreckage of San Venganza, Johnny rides again. Flames trailing behind him like the echo of some old song. The curse, once a punishment, is now a promise. He is the ghost rider. A watcher in the dark. A whisper of fire in the night. Not seeking redemption, but balance. He disappears down the road. And the world is left safer, but no less dark. Because evil never dies. It just waits. And now, there's someone out there waiting for it. Some stories are carried by plot, by spectacle, by set pieces that dazzle and distract. But others, like this one, ride on the backs of characters forged in fire, sometimes literally. Here, the world turns because of who these people are, what they carry, and how they burn from the inside out. Beneath every transformation, every confrontation, every streak of flame across the desert sky, there are people wrestling with their identities, their pasts, and the weight of impossible choices. And no one wrestles harder, or with more consequence, than Johnny Blaze. He's not your traditional hero. He doesn't leap into action out of a sense of justice or a desire to protect the innocent. His journey begins in desperation, not nobility. A teenage boy so afraid of losing his father that he signs away his soul to a stranger with a cruel grin and a coat made of shadow. That act alone defines Johnny more than any of his later heroics. Because it's not done out of greed. It's done out of love. And in that moment, Johnny reveals what lies at his core. He's someone who would sacrifice himself, even eternally, for someone he loves. That sacrifice is twisted, manipulated, and ultimately punished. But it doesn't come from darkness. It comes from the most human of fears, the fear of loss. As Johnny grows, that same fear mutates. He becomes reckless, not because he doesn't value life, but because he values it too much and feels unworthy of it. His stunt riding isn't just adrenaline-seeking. It's a kind of penance. Every jump, every fire-drenched fall, is a way to flirt with death without truly embracing it. He's waiting for the devil to come collect. And every time he lands a jump, walks away from an explosion, or laughs in the face of what should have killed him, he's not celebrating. He's surviving. Barely. Haunted. But the most fascinating thing about Johnny isn't the curse. It's his resistance to it. When the Ghost Rider first emerges, Johnny is terrified. His body twisted into something he can't control, his face burned away to a flame-wrapped skull, his hands no longer his own. And yet, he doesn't collapse under it. He doesn't flee. He studies it, tries to understand it, and eventually learns to wield it. That arc, from victim to vessel to wielder, is what sets Johnny apart. He never asked for the fire. But once it was his, he refused to let it define him. Still, the fire comes with a cost. He becomes a man forever on the edge of humanity. He can't touch without caution, can't love without fear. His relationship with Roxanne is proof of that. Roxanne Simpson, though not granted nearly enough screen time by the story itself, plays a vital role in shaping Johnny's internal struggle. She's more than the love interest. She's a mirror, a glimpse of the life he could have had, the one he left behind, and perhaps the one he still longs for. She carries her own hurt, masked under journalistic professionalism and a hard-earned independence. But when she looks at Johnny, there's still a softness, still a wound. She's angry, yes, but not because he vanished, because she knows he loved her and left anyway. And Roxanne doesn't back away when she learns the truth. She doesn't run when Johnny tells her he's cursed. She stands her ground. That steadiness gives the film its emotional heartbeat. When the world begins to unravel, when demons crawl from shadows and the sky splits in two, she doesn't become the damsel. She becomes the anchor, the one reminder that Johnny is still human underneath all that flame. Then there's Mephistopheles, the architect of all this pain, a figure who isn't merely evil, but eloquently evil, smooth, composed, and terrifying in his stillness. He doesn't snarl or shout. He smiles, offers deals like they're favors, and watches with quiet satisfaction as humans damn themselves trying to escape suffering. He doesn't force Johnny to sign the contract. He lets him. And that, in a way, is worse. Because the tragedy isn't that Johnny was tricked. It's that he agreed. Mephistopheles operates on the edge of logic. He doesn't break the deal, he just interprets it in the cruelest way possible. Barton Blaze lives and dies. Johnny gets power and torment. The devil here isn't interested in torture for its own sake. He's interested in leverage, in ownership. He doesn't want chaos. He wants control. Which is why Blackheart becomes such a threat, not just to Johnny, but to Mephistopheles himself. Blackheart is younger, colder, hungrier. He's not suave or charismatic. He's not subtle. He despises the old rules. He wants to break them, rewrite them, rule not as a collector of souls, but as a consumer of them. If Mephistopheles represents order within evil, Blackheart represents unchained appetite. He's cruel in a way that feels modern, casual, dismissive, reckless. He doesn't savor pain. He sees it as a tool. The souls he seeks aren't trophies. They're fuel. And that's what makes him terrifying. Where Mephistopheles is a strategist, Blackheart is a nuclear option. A demonic force too impatient to wait his turn. And his transformation into Legion, a vessel of 1,000 damned souls, is symbolic of what happens when evil compounds upon itself. He doesn't become more powerful simply by growing stronger. He becomes less human, less anchored, more hollow, a shell filled with screaming. The caretaker, then, becomes a vital counterpoint. Quiet, aged, and surrounded by the dead, he represents something older than either devil or demon, wisdom. He's been where Johnny is going. He's carried the flame, hidden from it, and lived with its echo for far too long. But when the time comes, he doesn't stay in the shadows. He rides one last time. Not because he has to, but because someone must. His ride alongside Johnny is more than a beautiful visual. It's a passing of the torch. A ride into battle that bridges past and future, fire and purpose. He knows his limits. But he gives Johnny the one thing he hadn't been able to find on his own. Belief. Not in destiny, but in choice. Even within the constraints of a curse, choice still matters. And that's what the rider ultimately symbolizes. He's not a mindless demon. He's judgment given form. Fire wrapped in decision. The penance stare isn't just a punishment, it's a mirror. The rider doesn't kill indiscriminately. He reflects, forces sinners to see their own pain, to feel what they caused. And in that act, the rider becomes something far more ancient and complex than just a flaming skull. He becomes justice. But what elevates Johnny's arc is that he doesn't simply carry the rider like a burden. By the story's end, he owns it. He refuses Mephistopheles' offer to remove the curse, not because he loves it, but because he's learned how to wield it. In choosing to keep it, Johnny doesn't just defy hell, he redefines what the curse means. It no longer controls him. It empowers him. Not as a weapon of vengeance, but as a force of reckoning. He turns pain into purpose. And that shift is what transforms this fiery spectacle into something more profound. The characters, though drawn with broad strokes, each serve the story's emotional architecture. They reflect different facets of morality, regret, temptation, and choice. They inhabit a world where the line between human and monster is thin, and sometimes burned away entirely. But what lingers most isn't the fire, or the chains, or the demons. It's the man at the center of it all. A man who lost everything, sold his soul to stop the bleeding, and ended up becoming the one thing even the devil couldn't control. A man who, when given a chance to run, chose to stay. To ride. To burn not for damnation, but for something dangerously close to redemption. Some films are forged quietly, smoothly, in studio lots and soundproof stages, where every beat is calculated and every moment unfolds on schedule. But others, particularly the ones that flirt with the supernatural, never arrive without their share of strange echoes and odd little footprints left behind. The making of this particular story, with all its flaming skulls and infernal deals, wasn't just a technical endeavor. It was a wild, unpredictable ride in its own right. Behind the fire and the chains were moments just as bizarre and unexpected as the story itself. And if you looked closely, you could almost feel the movie pushing against the boundaries of the real world, asking, "Are you sure this is just a film?" Let's begin with the man at the center of it all. Nicolas Cage. He wasn't just cast, he became the movie. Known for his love of the surreal, the dark, and the mythological, Cage didn't step into the role of Johnny Blaze lightly. In fact, his connection to the character went far deeper than most fans realize. Long before he ever donned the leather jacket and stared down the devil, Cage was already obsessed with ghost stories, comic books, and, most bizarre of all, occult symbology. During production, he often spoke about his personal connection to the metaphysical and his deep respect for the character's torment. And he wasn't joking. Cage showed up to set with ancient books on demonology, reportedly wearing hidden relics beneath his costume to stay in the right space spiritually. He once admitted in an interview that he believed the character's transformation scenes mirrored real ideas about spiritual purging and karmic balance. Some on set even said he refused to remove certain rings and amulets between takes, worried they would break the flow. To the untrained eye, it looked like eccentricity. But to those who watched him perform, especially during those late-night desert shoots, it looked like he was summoning something. It didn't stop with Cage. The production itself seemed to flirt with the unexplainable. One evening, while filming a key stunt involving the Ghost Rider's motorcycle tearing through a narrow alleyway, a freak electrical storm hit the area. No warning. No forecast. Just a sudden crash of wind and flickering streetlights. Cameras shut off. Power surged through equipment. Crew members later joked that hell got jealous. But some weren't laughing. One lighting tech swore he saw a shadow cross behind Cage's stand-in that didn't belong to any cast or crew. No one ever confirmed what caused it, but the footage from that night had a strange flicker, like fire had briefly licked the edge of the screen. Then there was the motorcycle. That glorious, flaming, supernatural beast of a machine wasn't just CGI. Parts of it were real, custom-built with twisted chrome, skull-like details, and tires thick enough to chew through gravel. It looked like something from a nightmare dragged into daylight. But what most don't know is how difficult it was to ride. The original stunt bike created for the film was so heavy and front-loaded that no one could keep it balanced properly during dry runs. Not even the veteran stunt coordinators. Eventually, modifications were made. But even then, it had a mind of its own. One particularly cursed day on location saw the bike tip itself over 3 separate times, once while sitting completely still on its stand. Cage, arriving on set, reportedly walked over to it, touched the gas tank and said softly, "Calm down." The bike didn't fall again for the rest of the day. Just coincidence? Maybe. But in a movie full of infernal energy, no one was quick to shrug it off. Visual effects played a huge role in bringing the rider to life. But here's the strange thing, it wasn't originally supposed to be that fiery. Early concepts had the rider's skull glowing more like embers, pulsing softly with heat. But after the first test shots came back, producers noted something odd. The skull didn't frighten people. It intrigued them. It even looked a little beautiful. Not the effect they were going for. So the flames were intensified, roaring brighter and higher until the transformation felt violent, unnatural, a body being torn apart by its own curse. To get it right, the team studied videos of combustion at the microscopic level. They mimicked the way fire danced across metal, how it flickered with breath-like motion. The result was something primal, less like digital animation, more like the very spirit of flame given purpose. But the process to render those scenes was so resource-intensive, one studio executive joked that the rider nearly burned a hole in our servers. And the eyes. Oh, the eyes. Those terrifying blackened sockets that seemed to see right through the screen. They weren't entirely digital. For close-up shots, Cage wore custom contact lenses so thick and reflective that they blurred his vision completely. He described it as acting in darkness, from memory. But that visual, the empty sockets catching flickers of surrounding flame, became one of the movie's most iconic images. And the eerie part? The lenses would fog from the inside, even in dry weather. Makeup artists said it looked like his skull was breathing. The film's locations added to the weirdness. Much of the shooting took place in Melbourne, Australia, dressed to resemble American landscapes. The crew transformed neighborhoods, reconfigured signage, and even imported vehicles to maintain the illusion. But they couldn't hide everything. On more than one occasion, kangaroos wandered onto set in the middle of takes, particularly during scenes shot in the outskirts. One memorable interruption happened during a graveyard scene at dawn. As Cage prepared for a solemn monologue, a kangaroo hopped behind a tombstone, stared at the camera, and vanished into the mist. "That one might have been a demon," Cage quipped. No one argued. Then came the pigeons. You might remember them, those flocks that flutter skyward at just the right dramatic moment. Turns out, those birds were harder to direct than any actor. The wranglers brought in for the scenes couldn't control their flight patterns, and during one climactic chase, the birds flew the wrong way, obscuring the camera entirely. The take was ruined. But it gave the director an idea. Later sequences were rewritten to include birds flying against expectation, a symbolic nod to Johnny Blaze himself, a man forever fighting the wind, the odds, the very course of fate. But perhaps the strangest fact of all is the origin of the movie's creation. The journey to bring the flaming skull to screen didn't begin in 2007. It began decades earlier, passed through the hands of multiple studios, rewritten over a dozen times, and attached to several A-list actors before Cage ever got near it. At one point in the late 1990s, Johnny Depp was loosely associated with the role. Later, Eric Bana. Even Ben Affleck's name was floated during internal discussions. But none of it stuck. Not until Cage, an actual comic book aficionado with a Ghost Rider tattoo on his body, stepped up and said, "This one's mine." That tattoo, by the way, it had to be covered up for the film. "We were painting fire on him," one artist said, while covering up fire he'd chosen years before. The film's reception, as it turned out, was just as strange. Critics were divided. Some saw camp. Others saw a cult classic in the making. But audiences? They came in droves. The movie debuted at number 1, pulling in over $45 million during its opening weekend. For a film with no previous cinematic universe, no traditional superheroes, and a main character whose face literally burned off, it was a staggering success. And over time, the cult grew. People re-watched it for Cage's committed madness, for the molten bike, for the sins reflected in the penance stare. And for that sense, hard to describe but impossible to deny, that this was more than just another comic book flick. It was strange. In the best way. The kind of strange that lives in midnight showings and fiery tattoos. In bootleg DVDs passed around with whispered enthusiasm. In Reddit threads dissecting every shadow in every frame. The kind of strange that doesn't go away. Because no matter how many years pass, the rider still burns. And every once in a while, if you listen closely on an empty highway, you might just hear the roar of a motorcycle with wheels of fire echoing through the night. And wonder if the story ever really ended at all. Some films invite reflection like mirrors clouded in smoke. You don't just watch them, you peer into them, searching for meaning hidden beneath spectacle, fire, and fury. And while this story rides on wheels wreathed in flame, dragging chains across the cracked earth, it also asks deeper questions about choice, identity, redemption, and the weight of a soul once sold. From a critical lens, what at first might appear to be pulp or camp or just another comic book ride becomes something more. A myth stitched together from fire and guilt, splashed in motion across the screen with sincerity that often dares you to take it seriously. And when you do, what you find burns long after the flames fade. At its center is a man, and not a typical one. The journey of Johnny Blaze doesn't unfold with the arc of a traditional hero. There's no clear call to adventure, no noble goal in the beginning. What launches his transformation is not bravery or destiny, but fear, desperation. A moment when a boy, looking down the long road of grief, decides to reach out and rewrite fate itself. Critics often circle this scene as the fulcrum of everything that follows. The deal at the crossroads. It's a classic motif, older than cinema, but here it takes on a new kind of weight. Because the tragedy isn't just that he sells his soul, it's that he does it for love. And love, in this world, doesn't save him. It damns him. Critically, this subversion is striking. Many superhero origin stories are built around accident or injustice. A spider bite. A murdered family. But Johnny's transformation is self-inflicted. He chooses the curse. That alone shifts the film's emotional resonance. From this early point, the story doesn't ask whether he can become a hero, but whether he deserves redemption at all. And in that, the story quietly reveals its true genre. It's not a superhero film. It's a tragedy with the bones of a western and the soul of a horror film. A man riding the margins between damnation and salvation, flames trailing behind him like the sins he can't outrun. When the transformation begins, the film doesn't hold back. The first time Johnny becomes the rider, the camera doesn't flinch, it lingers. Critics at the time pointed out how the scene felt less like an empowering moment and more like a violent birth. Bones cracking. Screams that weren't human. Skin falling away. And underneath it all, not a glorious new form, but a skeletal face caught between agony and rage. This wasn't a man made better by his powers. This was a man undone by them. And that tonal decision, though polarizing, shaped the entire reception of the character. Because here, the supernatural doesn't rescue, it punishes. This moment is mirrored by another crucial turning point, the first time the rider kills. He doesn't do it with flourish. He doesn't announce himself. He swings his chain, silent and final, and then unleashes the penance stare. It's not bloody. It's not loud. But it hurts. The stare, which forces its victims to relive every pain they've caused, becomes the film's most haunting symbol. Not just a power, but a reflection of the film's central theme, guilt. Not justice. Not revenge. But guilt, exposed, undeniable, seared into the eyes of the condemned. Critics looking for nuance saw this as a bold decision. The violence of the rider wasn't about domination. It was about reckoning. Then comes the appearance of Blackheart. As an antagonist, he doesn't rant or roar. He glides. With pale skin and icy calm, he offers a new kind of threat, not just to Johnny, but to the structure of the film itself. His presence introduces a question. What happens when evil isn't personal, but systemic? Blackheart doesn't want one soul. He wants thousands. The souls of San Venganza. A town that, like Johnny, once made a choice it could never take back. This is one of the film's sharpest allegories. San Venganza, in name and in narrative, becomes a symbol of collective sin. A community that bartered its conscience for gain, and was buried under the weight of its own betrayal. Critically, this subplot could have felt like world-building for its own sake. But it lands because it reframes the story. The battle is no longer about Johnny escaping his curse. It becomes about him owning it, so he can stand against something even darker than his past. In this shift, the film's structure subtly aligns itself with redemption arcs found in classical literature rather than modern comic book lore. The protagonist doesn't overcome the villain with strength. He overcomes him by embracing the very part of himself he once feared. He becomes what he ran from. This is perhaps best embodied in the final confrontation. Blackheart, now fused with 1,000 corrupted souls, becomes Legion. And when Johnny attempts the penance stare, it fails. Because Legion, a being made of nothing but guilt and pain, feels nothing. In this moment, critics noted a powerful thematic reversal. The hero's greatest weapon is useless against an enemy who has no remorse. That's not just an escalation in stakes, it's a comment on the nature of evil. That the greatest danger isn't just those who commit crimes, but those who feel justified in them. And yet, even in this moment of despair, the film plants its most profound idea. That power doesn't come from purity. It comes from will. Johnny takes the souls into himself, willingly absorbing the weight of 1,000 sins. It's a symbolic crucifixion. He bears the pain, not to wield it for glory, but to use it against the thing that thrives on suffering. And when the penance stare is used a second time, now with Johnny carrying the souls, it works. Because he feels them. Because he cares. In a film filled with fire and fury, this quiet truth stands tallest. Empathy is power. Suffering, when owned, becomes strength. The aftermath is no less revealing. Mephistopheles returns, offering Johnny the release he longed for. The curse, gone. A second chance. But Johnny refuses. And this refusal, while simple in dialogue, reshapes everything. He no longer sees the rider as punishment. He sees it as responsibility. It's not the redemption he asked for, but it's the one he earns. He doesn't walk away cleansed. He walks away committed. A flawed man choosing to keep his burden, not out of pride, but out of purpose. This ending was divisive among critics. Some found it too bleak. Others, too ambiguous. But for those attuned to the film's emotional architecture, it was fitting. Johnny didn't win. He didn't even escape. But he chose. And in stories about damnation and free will, that choice is everything. The emotional resonance of the film lingers precisely because of these decisions. It's not just a story about a flaming skull chasing demons. It's about a man trying to make peace with a past that cannot be changed. About finding dignity not in perfection, but in persistence. It's a story that says, sometimes the things that hurt us most are the things we're meant to carry. Not because they define us, but because they remind us of who we refuse to become. From a broader perspective, the film's impact rippled outward in unexpected ways. It arrived at a time when superhero films were becoming glossy, uniform, and tonally safe. In contrast, this film was raw, visually wild, emotionally jagged. Critics didn't all agree on its success, but many acknowledged its courage. It embraced melodrama. It leaned into mythology. It dared to take itself seriously, even when the audience wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Over time, this sincerity became part of its legacy. The camp, the grit, the melodrama, it all fused into something uniquely memorable. not in spite of its imperfections, but because of them. Because it wasn't trying to be cool. It was trying to mean something. To talk about guilt. About fire. About the echo of a decision that never stops ringing in your soul. And that's why, years later, the film still sparks conversation. Not just about its visuals, or its characters, or its strange production lore, but about what it tried to say, and how loud it had to burn just to be heard. Some films come together like puzzles, each piece fitting neatly into the next. But others feel like wildfires. Messy, unpredictable, impossible to control, and yet, when the smoke clears, what remains is unforgettable. This movie was very much the latter. A flaming motorcycle roaring across city streets. A man with a skull for a face. A script torn from comic book pages and dipped in gasoline. But behind the spectacle, behind the chains and infernos, was a production filled with sweat, laughter, technical wizardry, and more than a few moments where reality bent in unexpected ways. Bringing this story to the screen wasn't just about CGI. It wasn't even just about practical effects. It was about committing, fully and unapologetically, to an idea that had lived in the minds of comic book readers since the early 1970s. The challenge wasn't just how to animate a flaming skull or build a supernatural motorcycle. It was about capturing the tone, the strange balance of horror, heroism, and emotional weight. And it started, as most cinematic legends do, with a single name, Nicolas Cage. Cage didn't just star in the film. He lived it. Long before cameras rolled, he was already a fan of the comic. In fact, he had a Ghost Rider tattoo, inked years earlier as a tribute to one of his favorite characters. That tattoo? It had to be covered during filming to avoid breaking the fourth wall, creating the strange paradox of an actor hiding a tattoo of the very character he was playing. But Cage's dedication went deeper than skin. He immersed himself in esoteric literature, spiritual symbology, and occult lore. Between takes, he would speak to the director about ancient concepts of vengeance and karmic justice. He once described the writer as a fire elemental driven by moral gravity. On set, Cage was known to carry personal relics, amulets and crystals, some of which he'd collected from metaphysical shops, objects he believed kept him in the right spiritual frame of mind. Some crew members found it bizarre. Others found it inspiring. But no one denied the effect. When Cage stared into the lens, something flickered. Something otherworldly. But even before Cage was cast, the journey to make the movie was long and winding. The project passed through several hands over nearly a decade. At different points, stars like Johnny Depp, Eric Bana, and even Keanu Reeves were considered. Scripts were rewritten. Studios hesitated. The tone, for years, was a point of contention. Was it horror? Was it action? Could a flaming skeleton with a chain actually carry emotional weight? Eventually, the answer came not from fear, but from conviction. Director Mark Steven Johnson, fresh off his work on Daredevil, believed the film could live in both worlds. He envisioned it as a gothic western coated in chrome and hellfire. And to bring that vision to life, he chose Melbourne, Australia, as the unlikely backdrop. Melbourne doubled as American landscapes with surprising ease. Urban streets were redressed to resemble Texas. Cemeteries were built from scratch in isolated plains. One of the largest sets, San Venganza, the cursed ghost town, was constructed in a barren stretch of bushland. Under the baking sun, surrounded by artificial ruins and looming crosses, the crew often joked they were building a cathedral for the damned. Some days, the wind would pick up suddenly, swirling the dust into eerie spirals. Other days, kangaroos wandered into frame, interrupting shots and leaving everyone laughing. The challenges weren't limited to wildlife. The motorcycle, the Hell Cycle, as fans know it, was a monster of a machine. Custom-built, it featured massive tires, grotesque skeletal details, and exhausts that looked like dragon mouths. The thing was heavy. So heavy, in fact, that stunt riders had trouble maneuvering it through narrow set pieces. It wasn't built for speed, it was built for presence. One crew member quipped, "It doesn't ride, it looms." Despite its bulk, the bike became a character in its own right. Flames were digitally added in post, but the physical shell had to reflect the demonic energy of the rider. Designers pored over comic book panels, blending skeletal motifs with molten metal aesthetics. The result was something between a beast and a machine, an infernal steed that growled as it rolled. Cage, of course, insisted on doing many of his own riding scenes. He trained extensively, learning how to handle the weight and balance. He even requested minor design changes to the seat and handlebars to match his real-world comfort. He told the press later, "I didn't want to pretend I was riding hellfire. I wanted to feel it." The transformation scenes, where Johnny Blaze becomes the rider, were among the most complex. Cage wore performance capture rigs for close-ups, but the most iconic moments were done using prosthetics, reference models, and detailed CGI layering. The first transformation, a sequence filled with fire, cracking bones, and burning flesh, took weeks to render. The visual effects team studied everything from volcano footage to time-lapse decay in order to get the balance right. They didn't want the rider to look like a cartoon. They wanted it to feel visceral, painful, like a soul being wrenched from the body. On set, sound design was equally important. Instead of using traditional flame sounds, the audio team layered in the roars of wild animals, the crackle of burning wood, and the hiss of hot metal submerged in water. When the rider's chain cracked through the air, it wasn't just the sound of metal, it was the echo of judgment. The goal was to make the rider's presence felt in sound before it was seen. One particular trick involved reversing animal growls and overlaying them with the distorted sounds of church bells. The result? A sonic signature that made every entrance unforgettable. But not every moment was dramatic. There were plenty of odd, humorous beats on set. Like the time Cage, deep in costume, sat down at a local cafe during a break in filming. Still wearing his black leather jacket and with soot on his face, he ordered a coffee while reading a book on demonology. The waiter, unaware of the production, reportedly called the manager to report a very intense man doing some kind of satanic ritual. Or the time when Peter Fonda, playing Mephistopheles, arrived in full costume on a Harley-Davidson. Not part of the script, just something he did because it felt right. The crew didn't question it. Fonda, the Easy Rider himself, brought a gravitas that bridged eras. He often improvised his lines, delivering them in a slow, snake-like drawl that made everyone on set lean in a little closer. One take, delivered at sunset against a backdrop of firelit desert, had the crew clapping before "cut" was even called. Eva Mendes, who played Roxanne, brought warmth to the production. She worked closely with Cage to develop a chemistry that felt lived in, even though their characters had spent years apart. Off-screen, she was known to keep spirits high, bringing music to set and starting spontaneous dance breaks between takes. She once admitted that during the emotional reunion scene with Johnny, she'd tucked a small stuffed animal into her jacket for luck, a superstition she carried through several productions. And then there were the pigeons. Yes, pigeons. In a few key shots, flocks of birds were used to punctuate transitions, classic cinematic symbolism. But directing them proved nearly impossible. On more than one occasion, the pigeons refused to fly on cue, instead clustering around food carts and spooking actors. During a particularly frustrating take, they flew into the camera rig, halting filming for the day. The incident became a running joke, "The birds work for hell." Despite the chaos, the movie came together with a rawness that somehow worked. It wasn't always polished. It wasn't always perfect. But it had a kind of swagger, a belief in its own mythology that refused to be laughed off. The passion of the cast, the ambition of the effects team, and the fire of Cage's performance coalesced into something undeniably bold. When the film premiered, it was met with divided opinions. Critics couldn't decide if it was sincere or self-parody. Some scoffed at the melodrama. Others praised the visual style. But audiences showed up. They filled theaters. They cheered. And over time, what began as a risky genre blend evolved into a cult classic. Years later, fans still discuss the details. The glow of the rider's eyes, the crackling of the bike, the hiss of chains striking cement, and the stories from behind the camera, whispered like urban legends, of Cage's hidden talismans, Fonda's Harley ride into the sunset, the pigeons who wouldn't cooperate. Because when a film dares to walk the line between absurdity and myth, when it embraces its fire instead of taming it, it leaves behind more than just ash. It becomes a story worth telling. Again. And again. There are films where the setting fades into the background, a quiet canvas on which the story plays out. And then there are films where the setting becomes a pulse, a living, breathing entity that shapes the story, informs the characters, and haunts the viewer long after the final frame. This film doesn't just take place in a world. It rides through one. It scorches the earth it moves across. From sun-scorched city streets to ghost towns heavy with forgotten sins, the locations here aren't chosen, they're summoned. Each one acts like a chapter in a scripture made of smoke and chains, stitched together by the long road and the sound of tires screaming into the dark. The journey begins, fittingly, in a place where spectacle hides sorrow, a traveling carnival. It's the kind of place bathed in neon light and loud music, full of joy on the surface but trembling underneath. This is where Johnny Blaze was born. Not just in name, but in fire. The carnival, with its spinning rides and rusty scaffolding, serves as more than a backdrop. It's a metaphor for the delicate line between thrill and danger, between illusion and reality. The way the camera lingers on the tent flaps blowing in the wind, on the fading paint of the signage, even the smell you can almost sense, cotton candy mixed with motor oil, invites us to look deeper. Here, innocence teeters on the edge of ruin. That carnival fades, but its ghosts stay. As Johnny grows, so does the landscape around him. He trades the blinking lights of childhood for the raw blaze of desert highways. And this shift in setting isn't just geographical, it's spiritual. The world opens up, and in doing so, becomes empty. The highways he rides stretch on endlessly, straight as truth, but surrounded by nothing but sand and sun. These open roads, filmed with wide, lonely shots, emphasize Johnny's isolation. There's no civilization in sight. No homes. Just heat shimmer and the occasional dead tree, its limbs twisting like burnt fingers clawing at the sky. These roads don't lead to freedom. They lead to confrontation. Cinematographer Russell Boyd shoots these sequences with a kind of reverence. The setting demands silence, and the silence says more than any score ever could. The choice to forego excessive dialogue in these scenes turns the environment itself into a kind of witness. The land is watching, waiting. But it isn't all dust and dusk. The film finds another layer of mood in its urban locations, those nighttime cityscapes with their flickering streetlights and alleyways that seem to breathe when the wind moves through. These settings serve a specific purpose: contrast. Against the natural stillness of the desert, the city is chaos. Here, Johnny performs. Here, the world watches. It's artificial, every bit of it. Buildings that scrape the sky but hide nothing of value. Shadows that multiply rather than hide. When the Ghost Rider emerges in these places, it's like a spark in a powder keg. The fire clashes with neon, the infernal against the electric. One unforgettable location, an abandoned train yard bathed in the red glow of emergency lights, feels almost like a liminal space between worlds. Between the human and the cursed. Chains rattle in the dark. The camera dips low to the tracks, catching every vibration, every screech. The design of this space reflects what Johnny is becoming. Half order, half decay. Beauty hiding in ruin. And then there's the ghost town. San Venganza. It sounds like legend. A town swallowed by the past. Forgotten by God. Here, the earth is dead. The buildings lean like old men. Crosses still stand in the cemetery, but they're splintered, overtaken by weeds. When the wind moves, it doesn't carry life, it carries memory. Every shot in this location is bathed in earth tones and dying light. Browns, oranges, ash gray. No color thrives here. It's the perfect place for a final reckoning, because it feels like a place that's already burned. The production team built large portions of San Venganza from scratch, planting each broken window and weathered beam with care. The art direction ensured every prop looked like it had been there for 100 years, even if it had been hammered together that same week. Dust wasn't just part of the setting. It was applied, controlled, released into the air during takes like a character entering the scene. And the camera loved it. Every angle, every lens flare, every pan across the grave markers added weight. The film doesn't rush through this setting. It absorbs it, lets it speak. When Johnny walks through San Venganza, it feels like he's walking across the surface of his own soul, scarred, empty, but not without hope. The film's most iconic visual, of course, is the writer himself. And the way he interacts with the world around him transforms every setting he touches. The streets don't just light up, they crack. Buildings warp in the heat. When he walks through a church, the walls glow with an unholy aura. Even the motorcycle leaves behind a trail, not just of flame, but of transformation. Asphalt scorched into molten glass. Grass turned to ash. The environment reacts to him, visually reinforcing the idea that the writer isn't just passing through, he's changing everything. And that brings us to the film's use of color and light. Fire dominates the palette. Not just in literal flames, but in the orange-gold glow that follows Johnny wherever he goes. Even in scenes where no flames are visible, there's a sense of warmth pressing at the edges of the frame. A light that isn't natural. It bleeds into every shot, creating an atmosphere of unease. You never quite know when it will erupt. But this warmth is contrasted, constantly, by cold. Blackheart's scenes are steeped in blue, gray, pale green. His world is colorless. His presence drains the setting of life. In the forest, when he appears with his elemental allies, the leaves seem to wither. In the city, lights flicker and die. When he passes through the ghost town, the air itself stills. Cinematically, this is achieved through desaturation, slowing frame rates, and subtle visual distortion. It's not over the top. It's creeping. His evil isn't showy, it's deadening. And when these two forces meet, fire and frost, the frame splits. The battle scenes are crafted to maximize contrast. Bright fire against deep shadow. The rider's flames dance wildly, casting reflections that look like claw marks. Blackheart's aura spreads outward in a kind of void, swallowing light. The clash isn't just physical, it's visual. It's warmth versus nothingness. Emotion versus emptiness. The penance stare itself, the rider's ultimate weapon, uses one of the most effective visual tricks in the film. Time slows. The camera pushes in. The screen fades to white, then flickers through images, moments of pain, guilt, suffering. It's not gory. It's not even graphic. It's personal. The victim sees themselves through the eyes of those they've hurt. And the setting fades entirely. It becomes mental, psychological, a nightmare of one's own making. That's what the film does best. It blurs the line between internal and external, between the world the characters walk through and the world they carry inside. The settings aren't static, they respond. They whisper. They echo. When Johnny confronts Mephistopheles in the ruins, the wind dies. The flames grow still. Time pauses. And the setting holds its breath. The choice Johnny makes, to keep the curse, to ride alone, isn't shouted. It's spoken quietly. But the environment answers. The sun returns. The dust settles. The world shifts. Because in this story, settings aren't just places. They're reactions, reflections, warnings, and, sometimes redemption. So the next time you watch the rider blaze across the screen, flames trailing behind, chains slashing the air, wheels melting through pavement, remember this: it's not just about where he's going. It's about what burns in his wake, and what those places remember when the fire's gone. Some films are built like clockwork, quiet, precise, clean. But others are born in chaos, shaped by strange winds and stubborn sparks, pulled together not by predictability, but by passion. This film fell squarely into the second category. From the moment the first engine revved and the smell of scorched rubber filled the air, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an ordinary shoot. It wasn't just a movie about fire. It was fire. Unruly, consuming, and filled with its own kind of magic. And behind the cameras, in the shadow of burning chains and neon grins, something wild and unforgettable was taking shape. The cast arrived knowing this wasn't going to be a typical set. Nicolas Cage, in particular, brought an intensity that both inspired and mystified those around him. He didn't just show up to play Johnny Blaze. He brought his own mythology to it. Every day, he walked onto the set as though he were stepping into a ritual. He wore rings with ancient symbols, carried talismans in his jacket pocket, and even had his trailer scented with specific incense to keep the spiritual balance, as he put it. Most actors warm up with stretches or line rehearsals. Cage, he would meditate in a corner, eyes closed, sometimes whispering to himself. At first, the crew didn't know what to make of it. But then the camera rolled, and everything clicked. When Cage stepped into character, something changed. The quiet murmur became silence. People watched, held their breath, afraid to break the spell. Director Mark Steven Johnson later said, "Nicolas didn't play Johnny Blaze. He summoned him." Eva Mendes, who played Roxanne, had a different kind of presence, warm, focused, and always grounded. Where Cage spiraled into the ethereal, Mendes kept things human. She brought heart to the set, joking with crew members, hugging the extras, making coffee runs between takes. One day, she even surprised the entire team by baking brownies and handing them out in costume. "We're making a movie about a guy whose skull is on fire," she laughed. "We need to balance the energy a little." But the light-hearted moments didn't always come easy. The production faced more than its share of challenges, starting with the weather. Though much of the film was shot in and around Melbourne, Australia, the climate didn't always cooperate. What was supposed to be a dry, desolate ghost town often turned into a muddy mess thanks to unexpected downpours. The San Venganza set, in particular, took the brunt of it. On more than one occasion, production was halted so that crew members could use industrial fans to dry out the fake graves and repair the crumbling facades. The irony? The scenes being filmed were meant to take place in the scorching desert. "We were chasing hell," said one set designer. "But hell rained on us every other day." And then there was the motorcycle. The hell cycle wasn't just a prop, it was a beast. Designed to look like it had risen from the depths of the underworld, complete with skeletal flourishes and molten detailing, it was both a marvel of design and a nightmare to manage. Its sheer weight made it nearly impossible for traditional stunt riders to handle, especially during scenes that required tight turns or jumps. The custom tires, built for dramatic close-ups, offered very little practical grip. During one memorable stunt rehearsal, the bike tipped mid-turn, nearly crashing into a camera dolly. No one was hurt, but the moment was enough to warrant a full redesign of the bike's suspension system. Afterward, the stunt team named it Christine, after Stephen King's murderous car, because it seemed to have a mind of its own. Cage, ever the daredevil, insisted on riding it whenever possible. He trained for weeks to learn its quirks. His commitment impressed everyone, but it also led to one of the more surreal moments on set. During a night shoot in a canyon, Cage, fully dressed as the rider, black leather, flaming skull effects ready to be added in post, took the bike for a solo spin through the set. He rode through the mist, the moonlight catching the chrome, as crew members stood frozen, unsure if it was rehearsal or reality. One grip whispered, I think the devil's actually here." That wasn't the only eerie moment. Peter Fonda, who played Mephistopheles, carried his own kind of mythos. Best known for his role in Easy Rider, his casting brought a strange symmetry to the production. The original counterculture biker now playing the devil in a film about a cursed motorcyclist? It felt too perfect, and Fonda leaned into it. He'd show up on his personal Harley, cigar in hand, and glide into scenes like he owned the flames. But off-camera, he was the picture of cool wisdom. He told stories from the old days, shared tips with young actors, and at one point offered to personally teach the camera operator how to ride a vintage chopper. One afternoon, while resting between takes, Fonda turned to Cage and said, "You know, this role makes sense. The devil's just another biker who got tired of the road." They both laughed, but there was something in Fonda's eyes. Like maybe he knew a little too much about that road. Other cast members brought their own unique energy. Wes Bentley, playing Blackheart, had a method approach that made him quietly intense. He often stayed in character between takes, walking slowly, speaking in a near whisper. During one fight sequence, he reportedly improvised lines in Latin, words the crew later discovered were quotes from Dante's Inferno. No one told him to do it. He just did. But not everything was somber. The production had a surprising amount of levity. Between scenes of demonic possession and hellfire, there were ping-pong tournaments, prank wars, and dance-offs. One day, a group of extras playing townsfolk in San Venganza staged an impromptu flame-off, using Halloween skull masks and glow sticks. Cage judged the contest, declaring, "That's the best fake hellfire I've seen all day." There were also some unexpected animal encounters. While filming near a remote stretch of land, a group of kangaroos wandered onto the set, curious about the lights and motion. They stood frozen in a line, staring at the burning prop motorcycle like they were witnessing a visitation. Someone took a photo. It circulated around the crew with the caption, "Even nature fears the rider." Technical hiccups came often, but the team handled them with grit. The biggest hurdle was balancing practical effects with CGI. The filmmakers were adamant. They didn't want a film that felt fake. They wanted heat, texture, reality. That meant real explosions, real stunts, fire on set. The VFX team would then enhance, not create from scratch. But fire, as it turns out, is unpredictable. During one shoot, a burst of flame ignited a section of the set that wasn't meant to burn. The crew rushed in with extinguishers, saving the scene and earning a standing ovation from the cast. It wasn't always perfect, but it was always passionate. That passion translated into a strange camaraderie. The kind of bond that only forms when people work late into the night, lit by flickering firelight and adrenaline. The kind of bond built through setbacks and triumphs, costume malfunctions and script rewrites, busted engines and last-minute line changes. By the end of the shoot, the cast and crew had become something like a tribe. People didn't want to leave. On the final night, someone brought out a guitar. They sang under the stars, surrounded by desert silence and the distant echo of engines long gone. One producer turned to Cage and said, "You'll never be done with this one." Cage, smiling quietly, replied, "You're right. Some rides stay with you." And that's what the production of this film truly was, a ride. Unpredictable, wild, sometimes dangerous, always burning just a little too bright. But when the dust settled, when the last flame went out and the cameras were packed away, what was left was more than just a movie. It was a legend carved into the asphalt. And every person who was there will tell you, they felt the heat. Some stories thunder through your senses, roaring with fire, draped in leather, trailing smoke and vengeance. But beneath the crackling surface of this film, beneath the molten chrome and supernatural showmanship, something deeper smolders. Its power isn't just in the spectacle of a flaming skull tearing through night streets. It's in the weight that fire carries. The curse beneath the transformation. the aching stillness behind the scream. What burns hottest here isn't hellfire, it's meaning. This is a story not just of good and evil, but of guilt and choice, of justice warped by pain and love forged in damnation. To understand it, you have to look past the flames and into the shadows they cast. At the heart of it all is a single ancient theme, the price of a soul. This theme is planted early, like a seed in dry earth, when young Johnny Blaze makes the deal that changes everything. The choice is wrapped in desperation and love. His father is dying, and he wants to save him. The devil, smiling with cold precision, offers the cure. But what Johnny doesn't understand is that when you sell your soul, you don't just lose it. You become something else. That deal doesn't simply alter fate, it alters identity. And that becomes the core question the film explores through every turn. When you sacrifice who you are for someone you love, can you ever truly reclaim yourself? The rider, then, is more than a curse. He's a symbol. A manifestation of Johnny's guilt, his loss, his broken trust. When Johnny transforms, it isn't just magic, it's reckoning. His body ignites not to celebrate power, but to punish him. The rider doesn't ask questions. He judges. He looks through sin and burns it down to the root. And Johnny? He doesn't control it. Not at first. He's a passenger in his own body. A soul flung behind the wheel of a monster that sees only guilt and wrongness in the world. The transformation sequences, agonizing, noisy, bone-cracking, are symbolic rebirths. Not of a hero, but of a weapon. The flames strip away flesh and comfort, revealing something ancient and brutal. The skull, forever on fire, reflects a character who cannot rest, cannot cool, cannot stop. It's the embodiment of penance, a reminder that no act of mercy, like trying to save a dying father, can erase the consequences of stepping into darkness. Fire itself plays a central symbolic role throughout the film. It's not just visual flair, it's emotional language. Fire is used to separate moments of control from moments of surrender. When Johnny is himself, the world is warm, bathed in golden hues. But when the rider emerges, the flames shift, they become wild, blue-white, devouring. Fire marks the boundaries between choice and compulsion. And later, when Johnny begins to wrestle control from the rider, the flames become steadier, more focused, still dangerous, but directed. It's not the fire that changes, it's who wields it. Parallel to this is the theme of judgment versus justice. The rider doesn't dispense justice in the human sense. He doesn't weigh motives. He doesn't ask questions. He punishes. His power, particularly the penance stare, is symbolic of absolute accountability. No trial. No forgiveness. Just reflection. Victims are forced to feel every pain they've ever inflicted. Their souls absorb their own sins like poison. It's a brutal metaphor for what guilt can do when unchecked. The film suggests that justice isn't always what we think it is. Sometimes, it's colder, more primal, less forgiving. And this unforgiving justice is what sets the rider apart from traditional heroes. He doesn't save. He avenges. He doesn't inspire hope. He terrifies. Even Johnny's attempts to use the power for good are fraught with danger. The closer he comes to control, the more he realizes that control means nothing without purpose. So when he finally decides to keep the curse, not as a punishment, but as a tool, he reframes the entire story. He stops being a victim of fate and becomes an agent of change. This leads to another significant theme: choice versus destiny. The deal with the devil feels like fate. But throughout the film, Johnny is given moments, small, quiet ones, where he makes choices. He chooses to return to Roxanne. He chooses to face Blackheart. He chooses, in the end, not to surrender the curse. That final decision, to remain the Ghost Rider, to own the fire rather than be consumed by it, is the ultimate expression of free will. He can walk away. He can be free. But he doesn't. Because sometimes the thing that breaks you is also the thing that defines you. The symbolism of the motorcycle reflects this transformation perfectly. In the beginning, Johnny's bike is sleek, mechanical, a thing of steel and man-made power. But once the rider takes over, it becomes something else. It mutates. It breathes. It burns. It no longer rides. It hunts. The motorcycle is a visual symbol of identity, fused with supernatural wrath. It's not just transportation. It's an extension of the soul on fire. And when Johnny gains command of it, when he rides with it, not just on it, it becomes clear. He is no longer running from what he is. He is becoming it. The presence of San Venganza, the ghost town, is no less meaningful. It's not just a place. It's the past incarnate. A town lost to sin. A contract soaked in the greed and betrayal of hundreds. The ground itself seems cursed, dusty, hollow, empty of life. It's a graveyard, not just for people, but for choices. 4 deals gone wrong. The town serves as a mirror to Johnny's own inner world, scorched, broken, filled with voices he can't silence. And when the final battle happens here, it's not a coincidence. It's destiny echoing itself. The story begins with a soul sold. It must end where thousands were lost. Blackheart, Johnny's enemy, is less a man and more a concept. He symbolizes corruption unmoored from conscience. While Mephistopheles represents a kind of lawful evil, bound by rules and structure, Blackheart is chaos. He wants not just power, but dominion. He doesn't follow rules. He breaks them. He mocks the old deals. His plan to absorb the souls of San Venganza isn't just about strength, it's about erasing the old system. He doesn't want to rewrite hell. He wants to unmake it. When Blackheart becomes Legion, he loses all humanity. He stops being a singular evil and becomes the voice of collective sin. The thousands of souls inside him scream, not for salvation, but for control. The rider's powers don't work on him at first, because there is no guilt to exploit. Legion is a shell filled with echoes. But when Johnny takes the souls into himself, when he chooses to feel the weight of that suffering, the penance stare works. Because guilt requires empathy. It requires a soul. And in that moment, Johnny proves that he has more humanity than the demon who once owned him. This leads us into perhaps the most overlooked theme of the film: redemption through ownership. Redemption here doesn't come from forgiveness. It doesn't come from being saved. It comes from accepting the burden. Johnny doesn't erase the past. He doesn't undo the deal. He embraces it. He reclaims it. He refuses to let Mephistopheles take back the curse, because he understands something the devil never did. True power doesn't come from being unbroken. It comes from choosing to carry your scars and keep walking. Even the romantic subplot with Roxanne speaks to this theme. She doesn't save Johnny with her love. She doesn't fix him. But she represents what he's fighting for. A reminder of the boy he once was. The one who made the deal for the right reasons. Their moments together are filled with tension and longing, but also resignation. Roxanne sees what Johnny has become, and still believes in what he is. Her presence isn't there to change him. It's there to remind him of who he can be. Lastly, there is the lingering question of duality. Johnny Blaze and the Rider. Man and monster. Guilt and justice. The entire film is structured around mirrors and doubles. Mephistopheles and Blackheart. Fire and frost. Salvation and damnation. Even the visual style echoes this. Half the movie bathed in reds and golds, the other in blues and shadows. The conflict isn't just external. It's internal. Johnny isn't trying to defeat the Rider. He's trying to understand him. And when he finally does, when he becomes both man and flame, both sinner and savior, the story resolves. Not with peace, but with purpose. Because some flames aren't meant to be extinguished. They're meant to guide. So the next time you watch the rider peel through the night sky, chains burning behind him, skull aglow with fury and grief, know that it isn't just fire that drives him. It's every choice he made, and the soul he's still fighting to keep. Some movies leave their mark through narrative alone, tight scripts, charismatic performances, a good twist at the right time. But others, they carve themselves into memory by how they feel on screen, how they move, how they sound, how they glow in the dark. And this film was very much one of those. It was never meant to slip quietly into a catalogue of superhero tales. It wasn't sleek or subtle. It was loud, fiery, jagged around the edges. And that atmosphere, that searing, smoke-choked intensity, wasn't an accident. It was meticulously constructed, built through choices that layered one on top of the other, until the entire screen radiated with something untamed. At first glance, it might seem like this was a movie made with brute force. Chains, fire, roaring engines. But when you pull back the curtain, what you find is a surprising level of craft and deliberation. The techniques used here weren't about polish, they were about presence. Every camera move, every cut, every flare of heat on the lens served one purpose: to make you feel the heat, to sense the weight of the rider's curse, to see guilt burn in real time. It began with how the movie was lit. Unlike most comic book adaptations of its era, this film didn't lean on glossy, overlit visuals. Instead, cinematographer Russell Boyd opted for deep shadows and earthbound palettes. Golden light stretched across desert plains. Sodium orange street lamps cast long, crawling silhouettes. When the rider wasn't on screen, the world felt heavy, dusty, real. But the second that transformation came, when bone cracked through skin and the fire ignited, the visuals shifted into something supernatural. Colors intensified. Edges sharpened. Flames, bright and violent, took over. Lighting became a character in its own right. The glow of fire was never static. It danced. It flickered on walls. It bled into rooms that should have been safe. One of the most powerful choices the filmmakers made was allowing fire to invade spaces. It wasn't just an effect, it was emotional language. When Johnny became the rider, the environment changed with him. His power warped light, bent shadows, turned the ordinary into something volatile. Scenes were often shot with practical lights hidden behind set pieces, mimicking the effect of flames even when the CGI hadn't yet been added. This kept the fire feeling there, not imagined. The camera work echoed this shift. In the quieter moments, those conversations with Roxanne, the heavy silences before a decision, Boyd's camera remained still, grounded. Static frames, soft movements. But as soon as the rider emerged, everything changed. The camera moved like it was being pulled by something primal. Low angles were used frequently, emphasizing scale and presence. When the rider entered a scene, the camera didn't just follow, it chased. It dipped, spun, reversed, sometimes lingering just long enough on a face before snapping into motion again. You never felt like you were watching from a safe distance. You were inside the chaos. And those transformation sequences? They were crafted like horror. No triumphant swelling music. No glamorous close-ups. Just bone, flame, and suffering. Editors kept the cuts tight but not frantic, creating a rhythm that built tension rather than just flashing visual overload. Flesh melted away. Eyes disappeared. And what was left, burning, grinning, howling, wasn't a hero. It was a force. In interviews, the editing team described these moments as controlled nightmares. They wanted the audience to feel the pain of transformation, the violence of becoming something you can't undo. Sound played a massive role in shaping those moments. Rather than layering the scenes with heavy orchestration, the filmmakers leaned into a more atmospheric soundscape. The roar of the rider's bike wasn't just a motorcycle. It was a blend of engine growl, a lion's snarl, and a deep, rumbling wind. His chains? Not ordinary links. The sound design team recorded industrial metal being twisted and stretched, mixing in samples of steel being dragged across stone. The result was something that sounded less like a weapon and more like the earth groaning in protest. And then there was the penance stare. That silent judgment, the look that forced the guilty to live through the pain they caused, was built with careful sound restraint. No dramatic sting. No thunderous chord. Just the heartbeat of the victim, slowing, and a rising swell of breath-like whispers. The sound team used human voices recorded in reverse, looped and layered to create a sense of otherworldly judgment. When the stare happened, the world didn't explode. It imploded. It shrank down to the eyes, the silence, the shaking. That choice gave the power more gravity than any explosion ever could. Visual effects obviously played a huge role, but what's often missed is how restrained they were in key places. Yes, the rider's skull was CGI. The flames were animated. But much of the surrounding damage, the cracking asphalt, the melted steel, the scorched walls, was real. Practical effects were used as much as possible to ground the supernatural in something tactile. The Hell Cycle was built with multiple versions, some designed for stunts, others just for close-up shots of chrome, flame, or fury. The fire trailing from its wheels was added digitally, but the smoke it kicked up was very real. And the sound of it revving? That was no ordinary bike engine. It was constructed from dozens of sounds stitched together to evoke something inhuman. Even the film's editing style served its tone. Rather than going for the frantic, jittery pace common in action films of the mid-2000s, this film took its time. It let scenes breathe.